Hello. You may not know me, but I'm Erica. Yeah, and so today I'll be talking about supporting the near death experiencer, what mental health professionals should know. This talk is largely based off of my thesis from the University of Northampton and also my experience as a clinician and researcher. Oh, I need that, don't I? I also realize that this is my first in person talk since before COVID, so be nice. Thank you. So, a bit about me. Yeah, basically, why I'm qualified to be opinionated um, with this talk. So, I am a clinician researcher. I'm a counseling psychologist, which is basically the bastard brother of clinical psychology. We do the same thing. So I am chartered and registered in the UK. So basically, US translation is licensed. Um, and my clinical education and professional experience actually has always coincided with my parapsychological and transpersonal um, education. So I started learning about clinical mental health practices and parapsychology at the same time, primarily at University of West Georgia, and then completing my PhD in University of Northampton in the UK. And like I said, I am still based in the UK, but in London now. My private practice, which I have been operating full time, is Holistic Head Health. It's at London. And now that it's established, yeah, but I think I didn't say how long I've been operating it full time, but since last September. So it's very new. It's doing really well, thankfully. And now I'm to the point where I can also really hone in on its subsidiary, which is Anomalies Research, Counseling, and Consultation. So ARC. And outside of the exceptional experiences field, just your mainstream psychotherapy, assessment, and ADHD and autism coaching. So that's me. So essentially, for most NDErs, there is a pre-NDE identity and their post-NDE identity. So they often delineate who they are versus who they were to such a degree because that is the only way they can describe how much the NDE has permeated their whole existence. So this is one quote from somebody from my thesis research, which I'm going to assume that you've had time to read this while I was talking. Yes? Okay. So this is sort of my elevator pitch, abbreviated version of why NDErs may go to psychotherapy, again, based on the thesis. And as you can see, it is all relationship based. And that is kind of a direct funnel from the participants themselves or the NDErs themselves and how they also talk about their experiences. So I try to use a lot of their language within my own research. Um, and so the reasons tend to involve the relationship with reality. So, how they make sense of existence and what it means, the relationship with the NDE and its after effects, such as if they accept their NDE and if they're traumatized by it. So, if it's a negative one, or even if they are accepting certain after effects, such as new physical or psychical sensitivities, and then also the relationship with self, which is very multifaceted because basically all the relationships mentioned here feed and are fed by the other relationships. I can't operate a computer. Okay, I'm used to a Mac. I'm a Mac girl. Nope, it's okay. Thank you, though. um, so the last on the list is relationship with other people, which, as we will see, is often the most problematic for NDErs to navigate when it comes to life after the NDE and their mental health. Uh, One thing to remember is that the NDE itself may not be the topic an NDE or client comes to therapy for. So it could be the near death episode, so the thing that led up to the NDE itself. the personality change is unfolding after their NDE, which I call the primary after effects, and then the secondary after effects, so the related struggles to the changes they need to make or have made based off of their personality changes. So it gets a bit complicated with some of these after effects. Well, they're all complicated, I should say. But as an essential point to make is that while the majority of after effects may be seen as positive or neutral to the NDER, this does not mean that they are not challenging, particularly to the extent that they are impacting their overall functioning and well being. So these are two outcomes of my research. So the more someone reports having scenes from the future, the more challenging they report psychological after effects, but positive changes in their sense of life's purpose. And so the more someone reports having encountered a mystical presence, the more challenging they report psychological challenges, but also positive mood changes. So it's like they can be challenging, but also create really positive, transformative experiences and help overall the well being. It's just a matter of getting there for them. That's really important. So, again, more outcomes from my thesis. And I might just go over this quickly for time's sake. But basically, all of the well being outcomes that I looked into, so social relationships, life satisfaction, mood, and life purpose, are all very much related. Some impact more or more impact others. Some impact more than others. There you go. But life satisfaction and current sense of happiness is the most important. So it really comes down to, can the NDER live their life's purpose, right? Can they actually put that into action and make their life in line with how they see why they've come back, like why they're alive? So, on that note, not all NDErs come back aware of their life's purpose, and some come back aware that there is one, but it needs to be found. And so, that's definitely something that you know we can talk about in therapy, right? Because I think everybody can relate to the feeling that, like, I don't know what I want out of life, right? For the NDER, it might have come about differently and might be expressing itself differently, but obviously a very human experience to not know what you want out of life or feel like, there's a lot of reasons to not pursue it. Okay, so life satisfaction and social changes together impact one's perception of their life's purpose. And again, this is from the thesis. And this basically funnels down to social challenges. So how people perceive the NDER and accept them or don't accept them, creating the biggest hurdle for their life satisfaction. And so life satisfaction being, the most sort of quintessential well-being impact and the most vulnerable, basically. So we're seeing social challenges really influencing somebody's well-being regarding the life satisfaction. So now we're getting more into particulars. So reported development of psychic or mediumship abilities may be difficult topic to disclose due to stigma and pathologization. Um, that's kind of obvious, um, but it's quite nuanced as well. And one of those reasons why, which is on another slide, is because if there's one thing that the NDE feels like they can't disclose, then it's actually very harmful to their psychological well-being and influences their ability or desire or feeling like they're able to disclose everything else regarding their NDE and after effects. Another thing to keep in mind regarding mediumship and psychic abilities is that um, NDErs do tend to talk about how they need to learn or relearn personal boundaries, energy moderation, and other ways that impact their day to day lives. They often talk about, they are receiving so much information psychically that they don't know when to disclose or when to not disclose to people. Like they might be walking around the grocery store, picking up something, and they feel they really want to tell the person next to them who's like reaching for the rice box or something that like their deceased grandmother is talking to them, but they're like, this is also a stranger. So like, do I do it? Do I not? And that's very nuanced, right? So we're also talking about what's the word? Social propriety and, yeah, just boundaries, which I think we can all relate to. So some after effects may seem contradictory, such as becoming more introverted and antisocial, but loving people more, or loving people more, but being more critical of them or selective with whom they associate. So this, or these are other outcomes too that came through in my thesis. And so you're really looking at them recognizing that they have a whole bunch of love for people and often feeling like their life's purpose is to work with people or help people, but at the same time, feeling as if they are more introverted and having a smaller social battery. Also, that can be really hard to navigate if you are a medium or psychic or psychic. One thing to also note is that a lot of NDErs tend to um, incorporate their mediumship abilities to help them have those boundaries as well. So, not all NDE or clients who come to therapy for problems associated with their NDE know that they've had one. This is especially true if they are children when they've had their NDE. So, this is one of my participants who I call Damon here. Spent decades, basically until his 60s, not knowing that he had an NDE. And that was largely due to his parents suppressing um, him talking about it. So, very much in line with your research, Philip, as far as encouragement and suppression. And his story was really sad to hear. Like, if he was very accepting of it, very gracious because he had integrated, which I'll explain that word. The all like the NDE also not realizing that he had one until his 60s, and then also why his parents responded the way they did. So a lot of forgiveness, which again, dysfunctional family dynamics and forgiveness, when what that means to the person, definitely something that we can all relate to and understand, regardless of having an NDE. So, those who had their NDEs under the age of 20 have poorer social well being, and that definitely deserves more research, which I plan to do. But I think we can assume that most likely that's due to kids not having a long life before having their NDE, right? They don't have that pre NDE life to rely upon as much as adults. They're much more under the sway of society and especially their parents. Their personalities are still developing. And yeah, so you're getting to know yourself as a human being and then have this exceptional experience to add to it, which most people don't have. So many indie ears go into the helping fields and seeing that their life purpose is to work with people. And a lot of NDErs do go into psychology or becoming therapists themselves. And a lot of them do become therapists who also market themselves as mediums as well. But then also, there are those who don't disclose that too. And hopefully, that's my next research topic. Anyways, um, yeah. And so, again, this helps them have those boundaries to build better boundaries. So, a lot of NDErs that I've talked with or were participants will talk about how people will try to utilize or maximize their mediumship abilities, right? So they keep coming to them, trying to, contact their deceased relatives or um, basically monetize their psychic abilities, right? And so in order to say, okay, this is my work and this is my life, right? So work life balance, they make it work. And then, well, their mediumship, right? And their psychic abilities or really helping people. And then have, the rest of their life. So really that delineation. So, a particular way of having work life balance. And a lot of people maybe stigmatize that because it's like, well, you want to help people, but you want to have them pay for it. But like any healthcare professional, me included, like needs to make a life, right? So, and there is a lot of issues with, for some NDErs, not being able to have the moderation of trying to do what they really feel like they want to do while also considering the sort of day-to-day necessities, right? So having the ability to support yourself and your family. So this really is a very pragmatic way to do that. So for me, I define therapy as a collaborative and creative effort between the therapist and client. So I think that's the most pragmatic way to see therapy. And this keeps in mind that this is a process and a joint venture where mainly it's led by the client and not something that is done. Right. So I don't do therapy. I'll joke that I therapize people, but like that's a joke. So, and I don't try to be helpful. So therapy is not about me nor me doing something to the client. Um, this placement of the therapist's importance, right? So my importance helps to maintain humility, thereby providing a solid foundation of being therapeutic, which is what our sole purpose is. So it's not doing therapy, but being therapeutic. And so we'll start talking about Grayson and Harris's research. And this is one quote from them from their 1987 publication. And it says, the therapeutic work is complete when the individual has found a way to actualize in daily life the love he or she received in the NDE. And we'll talk more about that in a second. So basically, what they mentioned, we often call integration. So this is a word that you'll often see in the NDE research, but also a word that is commonly used by NDErs themselves. Another word for it might be synthesis. Thank you. Um, and so, in summary, it is basically when you are able to process fully consciously your experience without imposing barriers on your present functioning, right? So when you have your pre NDE life, your NDE itself, and post NDE life, right? With the primary and secondary after effects all balanced, right? And it's not impacting your well being or functioning to the degree where it is creating a sort of disorder in your life. Like you feel like, okay, there might be challenges, but I don't feel overly burdened. I'm capable and able to handle this. So, because of the shortness of time, I'm going to quickly skim over some things. So, Standards of Care by Grayson and Harris is based off of a meeting in 1984 at the International Association for Near Death Studies Conference. And their accumulation of the meetings between NDErs and mental health professionals resulted in a 1987 publication in the Journal of Near Death Studies. And basically, you know, they said we need more research in this. And then there really hasn't been too much research based off of this topic. So I really felt motivated to take up the mantle and continue that as well. Although there has been, some research about psychotherapy in the NDER sense, it's just not to the degree that it really should be, right, to best support people who have NDEs. Let's see. Thank you. I want to get to kind of therapy and action. So, well, one thing I do really want to say is that a lot of times the NDE is precipitated by acts that are quite stigmatized, such as attempting suicide or having other violence, an abortion, or anything like that. And that's really something that should be considered as a therapist working with an NDEer. And so it's not just the sort of exceptional experience area that needs to be considered and honored, but also this. And so bracketing your stance and being accepting of people's experiences and not being judgmental obviously is a very fundamental aspect of being a therapist who is therapeutic. here. I wrote a lot. I wrote more than I thought I would. And okay, like I said, social challenges are generally the most detrimental, and that includes family, romantic relationships, and friends. There's not really been research into divorce rates or relationships breaking up for NDErs. There's been some, but it's estimated about 50% of NDErs do get divorced or have significant relationship breakups directly due to the changes from the NDE, which is on top of already the very high divorce rates that we have. So we can have relationship counseling or therapy concerns too. I think you get the picture that even though NDEs are exceptional experiences and have particular after effects, they often do result in very human challenges. One thing also to note is that a therapist can traumatize, so it's very important to be responsible and accountable. Just because this is, thank you, Gerhard, a quite unusual but very human experience, that does not mean that you have the liberty to treat it as sensational or to give your opinion and that sort of thing, because that is very traumatizing. They're already a very vulnerable group of people due to having the NDE, but also trying to integrate that experience as a human being. Okay, so most people want to know what kind of therapy might be best for working with the NDER. And sorry, but not sorry, there is no best method, right? No size fits all. Um, all people are individuals, and no NDE is exactly like the other. And I really advocate for all mental health practitioners to be multimodal when working with clients who have any experiences. And that's why I say, or my business is labeled Holistic Head Health. Kind of, I think gives a quick picture to that. But there are best methodologies, however. So these are just my recommendations. Like I said, tailor your approach to your client and be curious, educate yourself. Your client is the most educated person about their own experience and also about what they want and need. And you are there to facilitate, those things being actualized. So the more you know. If you're, a kid from the 90s, you know that. So always be curious and be informed. Ask your client, but then also do your homework in general. There's a lot of information out there already, especially from NDErs. I think that shows the magnitude of their resilience. They have supported themselves. They shouldn't have had to the degree that they have. And it's really our job to kind of pick up where we should have long ago to offer that support. And yeah, try not to fit them into a box. Obviously, pathologizing them is something that they've experienced time and time again, even unto themselves, right? And that's definitely a stigma and something that we should not do. And therefore, educating ourselves is really important, just medically, right? It's also our duty to know like the medical side, and to use that when needed, right? Being very careful. So somebody can have what we would say a comorbid, presentation. So the NDE shouldn't be. So if you're giving an NDE or a diagnosis, it shouldn't be on the NDE itself. But say if the person is experiencing like major clinical depression because of the after effects with it, say like the social ramifications, we would say still that person has clinical depression, but that is bracketed from the NDE itself, right? So there's no saying you had an NDE, therefore you're schizophrenic. It's like you are experiencing a very human situation that we all can, as far as having, say, maybe family dynamics that are detrimental, which can result in your well-being being impacted so much that it literally is disordering your life, right? So that's how I like to frame diagnosing and why we would say it's a disorder, right? There's nothing wrong with you. It's just that it's literally disordering your life to that degree. So some approaches may be more I'm going to go just 3 more minutes over. But some approaches may be more obvious in their utility than others. So, obviously, existential and humanistic psychologies would be the most obvious and transpersonal. So, Rogerian, right, being client focused, really letting the person being the lead in the therapeutic process. Viktor Frankl's logotherapy, which not a lot of people, even in the existential and humanistic fields, know about, but that's specific to meaning making and techniques to help a person reconcile, integrate, synthesize experiences, and also how to actualize or act on what they're making meaning out of. So, even within my more mainstream psychotherapy practice, I'm often talking with people about like what they really feel like they want out of life, right? And they work 9 to 5. A lot of my clients work for Microsoft, actually, and so I have a lot of clients through that who are like, "Oh, I used to be really excited by this idea, but now I'm realizing I want to do other things, and maybe I can, but I'm afraid." And so we talk about meaning making and motivating and how to go about that and accepting fear, but also talking about the fear of living a life unlived, right? Or not lived and regretting when you die, not actually living the way that you wanted, that you had a whole life where you were kind of just going through it. And so there is something to say about having an NDE and having that awakening, right? The spiritual emergence and the urgency to live a life most fulfilled. So that's really my goal as a therapist, working with anybody, not just NDErs, to help them achieve that goal. So transpersonal psychology is also very much in line with NDErs and also their vernacular. And a lot of your NDErs who become therapists will probably fall into existential, humanistic, or transpersonal psychologies. So, psychosynthesis, I would say, is a particular um, methodology that is very useful. Same thing with expressive arts and just more meditative and mystical practices. Like these are things that NDErs tend to take up themselves quite naturally when they start really studying what they become interested in. Um, as noted too, so grief, trauma, psychoeducation, support groups such as IANS are really topics to go into. So, yeah, there's a lot of grief and trauma involved with not just the near death episode or NDE, but the after effects. And social prescribing is directing people to the supports that they need outside of the therapy room. And so that would be something like the support groups, which NDErs talking with NDErs and being amongst their people and being able to normalize and talk freely as much as possible is really important. So some approaches are perhaps less obvious. So career counseling, acceptance and commitment therapy. Because again, there's the challenge of being able to moderate, say, such big love that you now have from the NDE and the empathy, and so accepting that okay, this actually needs to be regulated or moderated so you can act on these things without causing huge imbalances in other parts of your life is really important. Psychodynamic therapy, particularly with clients who had NDEs as children or teens, family systems, couples counseling, CBT ish. So I say tread very carefully just because we don't want to put strict CBT, at least my opinion. This is my opinion part. With these experiences, we want to say frame them with the meaning making, right? So CBT can be useful when we're talking about coping strategies, right? So how do we help people with anxiety? Um, cognitive distortion. So feeling like I'm a bad person because I went to hell in my NDE. So that's a cognitive distortion that we can work with, which CBT can be helpful with. But again, framing it with the meaning making and really processing what that is. And so use these approaches, with more client-led, collaborative, and self-exploratory methods. Um, and that's it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this interesting and stimulating presentation. Unfortunately, we are so delayed now that we should directly go forward with the next presentation. Perhaps one short question, one short answer, as long as they are installing a new presentation. Is there any question? Okay, in the back.
Sorry, y'all. Y'all, you can always come up to me to ask questions later.
Short question, short answer.
Have you had any cases where you have a patient who has had changes in their speech patterns as a result of the NDE?
Yes, so there are a lot of cases like that, but not the most common. I will say, because of the increased introversion and feeling like you have less of a social battery, that's where you really see that. And so you can relate that to, say, autistic burnout, where they also lose cognitive functions like speech at a certain point. And that is definitely something that NDErs have talked about with me, either in therapy sessions or through the research. Obviously, not using that vernacular, but very much in line with it.
So thank you, Erika.
Thank you.